Welcome to Second Table, where we discuss spirituality, philosophy, and psychology. I'm your host, Winston Janis. All right, I'm really excited to share with you all today a great conversation that I had with one of my longtime friends, Morgan Caraway. Morgan is an author, a musician. He's a pioneer in sustainable living. His most recent book is titled Ecological Awakening, and you can find that on Amazon and other places online. Morgan's really passionate about sustainable living and the whole climate change crisis and our connection to the earth and how that connects with our spirituality. He's a really thoughtful, funny, amazing guy. So I hope you enjoy the conversation we had together. Morgan can be found, if you're interested in learning more about him, his website is sustainablelifeschool.com. He's led workshops on natural building. He actually lives in a house that he built himself out of earth bags. So really talented and smart guy as well. So like I said, hope you enjoy our talk. So you and we go way back, and I'm really excited to be doing sort of the first official episode of this podcast with you, because we got a lot of history of having some deep conversations, and you know, it's hard to find really, it seems people who are really into the stuff and have the same kind of interest that we have had and the things that we've sort of bonded over,
Yeah, philosophizing is pretty important to us, also known as bullshitting. Yeah. And, I guess we find some joy in it because we return to it again and again,
Right. Yeah, it's fun. And it's, it's good to go beyond the small talk and
current politics.
Oh, gosh, don't get me started. But yeah, like we were talking about before we started this, we met back in 2012.
I'm glad you remember now.
Yeah, now I remember. Well, it's close. I said 2011, right?
That was close. That was good. Good shot. A good try. Yeah.
Yeah, and so at that time, Asheville, North Carolina. And what was going on for you around that time? Give a little bit of maybe of your background.
Well, do you want that time period, or do you want like kind of from the womb forward? What time range are you looking at?
Well, I guess not necessarily like a full in-depth autobiography, but just like what's your path been?
Okay, yeah. So grew up in St. Augustine, and I was the only child. And I entertained myself through drawing, and I never had a hard time entertaining myself. Always very good at that. And I would say in my teens, or maybe even like preteen, I developed an interest in some of the bigger questions as to what's going on with this life thing. So I was already kind of interested in it. And as I got farther in my teens, I think I became basically a full-on seeker, searching for the big answers to life, to the question of what is going on here. So that led me down a lot of different paths. I had people who were influential in my life who were involved in different belief systems. And, for different periods of time, I would kind of identify with these different ideas and sort of feel like I had found the truth each time, Mm-hmm. So that happened many times to me. And I think it would always kind of end up in disillusion to some extent. I was always looking for the answer, but I never really felt like, at least for a long time, I didn't feel like I was really finding exactly what I was looking for. But anyway, fast forward some, And, eventually I met Mary Jane, and she and I, we kind of shared an interest in living off grid, living alternative lifestyles. So we ended up deciding to build our own house and started researching, and eventually built our own earth bag house. And kind of in that same time period after I met her, I felt like I had truly found the answers to life's questions in the form of Advaita Vedanta, which, if anyone is listening to this familiar with that or is unfamiliar, it is a non-duality. And it's basically based on a Hindu idea that there is really one substance in the universe, or one reality. And the appearance of multiplicity is just an appearance, Mm-hmm. So anyway, in that philosophy, I felt like I had found the answer. And it was pretty convincing at the time. I really felt like that was sort of the final thing for me. And it felt pretty good, the belief system. It felt inclusive. It felt freeing to the mind. There were a lot of positive things about it. But it wasn't too long after that I've told you about it, Winston, plenty of times, but one day I was washing dishes. And at this point, I had already written a book, Blessed Disillusionment, on the subject of non-duality. And it was super, it was well received at the time. And I had people talking to me about the philosophy and trying to become clearer on it. And I was pretty invested in it. And then I told you, one day I was washing dishes, and it was just kind of like the rug was pulled out from under me. Like all of these ideas that I had been holding on to, that I felt like I knew deep in the core of my being, were just shown to be emptiness, or shown to just, it was shown that I didn't know anything, basically, that nothing that I knew was true. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a startling revelation, and an awakening, I would say, or an opening at least to newer, inspirations and knowledge and realizations.
I would say the unknowing, right? Mm-hmm. Not knowing, and just being open to the mystery has been one of the themes between us. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And, as we've talked about in Christian mysticism, there are those different schools. There's gnosis and basically agnosis,
Yeah, or like the apophatic tradition and the cataphatic. Cataphatic is using images to portray God or try to conceptualize God. And the apophatic is without images and saying God is not this, God is not that. Right. Realizing that God is beyond any concept, any box we can put God in.
Right. Yeah. Right. And, we talk about that idea as well in terms of like the Lakota Sioux idea of the Great Spirit. And the defining characteristic, my understanding of the defining characteristic of that concept is they don't try to put any limitations or any quantifiable, things on that image. The great mystery is another way to say it,
Yeah, I know we've had a common interest in Zen to some degree and Buddhism. And I mean, one of the things that's really drawn me to it is I feel like Zen and Buddhism are not really a religion in the sense that we think of in the West. When I talk to people about it, it's kind of like Buddhists don't necessarily, it's not that they disbelieve in God, it's just that they refuse to, at least in certain schools, right, to put a name on God or to conceptualize God, because Buddhism is really more of a kind of empirical based thing, right? It's based on experience. They want you to experience, they say, we're not going to talk about God. We want you to sit down, be quiet, and experience God for yourself.
Right. That I feel what you're describing is Zen. And then I feel like there is also more of a kind of belief-based Buddhism with different Buddhas and
Sure.
concepts of future Buddhas and all these things. So I feel like there is sort of the belief-based Buddhism, but I definitely agree with you that Zen Buddhism, to me, the essence of Zen Buddhism in my current understanding, which I do want to allow to change as time goes on, I think that's an important thing to leave the mind open. But I feel like the essence of Zen is an open mind and sort of, as we've talked about, beginner's mind, the concept of beginner's mind, in the full mind, in the master's mind, there are few possibilities. It's already full of knowledge. But in the beginner's mind, there are endless possibilities. And to me, I feel like Zen Buddhism, that to me is sort of the essence of it, the way I currently see it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that openness to things. It's funny. As you well know, Alan Watts is one of my major influences.
Admit it, he's a god to you.
I worship him a little bit, a couple times a week, but no. But he was talking about how the popular understanding of, in the Buddhist tradition, a bodhisattva is a being that has achieved enlightenment, but decides not to leave samsara.
Not to attain nirvana. Right.
Right. The samsara is the wheel of birth and death. It's this daily life. And an enlightened being can move on to samsara, which, there's different possible interpretations of what that means, but basically beyond this existence and, total bliss and all that. And so a bodhisattva, though, out of compassion, decides to stay in the realm of samsara in order to help the beings that are in the world and serve them. Even though they could move on, they stay here and help us, right? So that's kind of the popular understanding of the bodhisattva. But Watts was saying that the more sort of esoteric interpretation or understanding of a bodhisattva is that the bodhisattva, upon realizing enlightenment, understands that they don't need to go anywhere in order to have nirvana, that it is to be found in this daily existence, this ordinary, everyday existence that we find ourselves in, that it's not to be found anywhere else. And I feel like that's been a common theme that we've talked about as well.
I've heard it said, nirvana is samsara. It's just different perspectives on the same thing.
Yeah.
And the old things from the Diamond Sutra, emptiness is form, form is emptiness. So it's basically pointing, and you could apply this to, for example, science's concept of matter. We see matter as solid objects, and even our own science tells us that solidity is an illusion. That actually these are all little atoms, and an atom is mostly made of space. An atom is like a solar system or a galaxy, and just has electrons, protons, all doing their little dance. So even matter, even what so much that science has been based on, even science admits that matter is mostly emptiness. So anyway, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. I feel like, my current view of it is there's so many different perspectives from which you can look at anything. And based on which perspective you're looking from, it can seem like it's the only way to see it, and it can seem like no other perspectives have validity. But looking in a different way, you can have a totally different outlook on the exact same thing.
I mean, I don't know to what degree that connects, but in terms of so as you know, and as I've shared on this podcast, that I am very close to being ordained as a Christian pastor, which is crazy in some ways when I think about it. But I do see, as much as there are distinctions between traditions like Buddhism, which you can't really also encapsulate. There's so many different branches even of Buddhism, probably even more than Christianity, actually.
Right.
And yet there are parallels. So there's distinctions, but there's also parallels. And everything we talk about, I see parallels within Christianity. You know, we were talking about finding enlightenment or nirvana within daily, ordinary existence. And to me, that's what the incarnation, the doctrine of the incarnation, the idea that Jesus was the incarnation of God, that God entered into the world in human material form, to me signifies that this ordinary everyday existence is sacred. It's a kind of it's setting aside and saying what is ordinary is sacred. So they could have had Jesus born in a palace, right? No, Jesus is born in a manger, just son of an ordinary carpenter, rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. All these things are meant to be a contrast and saying, where is God to be found? God's to be found in a vulnerable infant, in a pigsty, right? Riding not on a king's stallion and sitting on a throne, but on a donkey. So it's saying you're looking in the wrong place. If you're looking for God and you're trying to look up into the heavens or look into the king's palace and all this stuff, you're looking in the wrong place. God is not there. God is in the place that you are, the last place you think of looking.
Right.
You know?
Well, I like your take on it a lot. I feel like generally the legend of the virgin birth and, and even the resurrection, I feel like in some way, those both point to the idea that Jesus was not a human being. If he indeed existed, that he was not a human being. But to me, the much more compelling and interesting idea is that he was, of course, one of us. And, if he did exist, he was a human being who, from much of what is attributed to him, as far as things that he said, found love. And as you're kind of pointing at, he didn't, apparently judge or condemn one group of people. He would hang out with the prostitutes or the downtrodden, the untouchables.
Yeah, the drunkards, the tax collectors.
The drunkards, right?
All those people.
So moral people would come to him and say, why are you doing that thing? Or people who were considered moral at that time in Judaism or whatever, they would say, why are you hanging out with those sinners, with those people? And, I think his realization was that everyone is connected and everyone is part of this, sacred happening of life. So anyway, I definitely understand what you're saying. I do think usually, though, some of those legends about him, which, of course, the virgin birth, that was a legend from Zeus. And that goes way back with lots of deities who were knocking up virgins. And, those are, old ideas that have been around for a long time. But I do, I feel like, and I feel like you may agree, the message of Zen is you can experience what Buddha experienced. And to me, the best message we would get out of Christianity is you can experience what Jesus experienced. You can, see life through the eyes of love.
Right. I think that is, in a way, whether consciously or not, what is intended by this whole notion that God is not only fully divine, but fully human. And exactly, I mean, Watts, once again, talked about that, where we have unfortunately kicked Jesus upstairs, put him on a pedestal, where we say, well, that was great for Jesus, because Jesus was, well, the boss's son, right? So of course he was able to do all this stuff, and but me, I can't do that, right? But no, when we read the Gospels, when we read the text, it's like Jesus is actually calling us. He's saying, you will do greater things even than these, than I have done. And Jesus is calling to his disciples and saying, join me, follow in my footsteps. There's nothing in the Bible where Jesus is saying, accept me as your Lord and Savior, to bow down and worship me. You know who does that in the Bible? Satan. Satan is the one who says, bow down and worship me. Right. Jesus simply says, follow me. Follow in my footsteps.
To put him on a pedestal is the worst thing that could possibly happen. Because I think in the spirit of love, what we want is, it's universal. Nobody is cut off from that love. But if in your mythology you make one person special, you kind of devalue everybody else. If you make one person divine and everybody else is merely human, merely mortal, then it does sort of devalue everyone. So to me, I like the idea that, and as you said, attributed in the words of Jesus many times, there will come those who do greater works than I. There are many rooms in my Father's house. There's lots of quotes that are basically pointing that he wasn't the end all. He wasn't the be all end all. He was just, someone who maybe had found the path of love in his time. Yeah. And was trying to walk it,
Yeah, I love, Ram Dass's, Ram Dass was this teacher, for anyone who doesn't know, who used to be a professor at Harvard, Richard Alpert, but he traveled
started
to India.
Hanging out with Timothy Leary.
Yeah, did the LSD thing.
Acid, and then went to India. Still, the acid, I guess, or doing the drugs hadn't really answered his questions, he felt.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm not necessarily trying to go, we can maybe talk about that at some point, but the fact that his teacher, I remember I was really impacted by a story where his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, he told a group of followers at one point, go off and meditate like Jesus. And the followers were sort of taken aback and like, well, how did Jesus meditate? And then the guru, Neem Karoli Baba, became very still, and everyone was just sort of in this moment of suspense, and this single tear rolled down his cheek, and he opened his eyes, and he was clearly just full of emotion, and he said, Jesus was lost in love.
Yeah.
So just kind of go be lost in love. And but
there's the idea that Jesus was moved by the Holy Spirit, by God, whatever you want to call it. But I feel like there's a potential for all of us to tap into love. We do live in a time of great fear. I feel like fear is the dominant, the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist. Fear is the big thing. The politicians, of course, are pumping fear. The media is pumping fear, because that helps them sell newspapers or advertising or, what have you. Mm-hmm. So I feel like fear is the big dominant thing. But I personally feel like love is available to all of us. And, how do you define love? I would say my current definition is love is a feeling of boundlessness and of the divisions being absent between us and another. That would be how I would probably define it in this moment. But I feel like that's available to all of us, basically. When we quit seeing others as something alien to us because of their beliefs, because of anything, because of the color of their skin, because of their sex or sexuality, whatever, I feel like this understanding this that Jesus was speaking from is available to all of us.
Yeah. Well, I honestly, one of my favorite definitions of love was what Eckhart Tolle said, which is love is when you are recognizing yourself in another.
Right.
And I understand that maybe that could be problematic in some ways, but I do like that definition, that you're seeing yourself in another, you're recognizing yourself in another, going beyond.
I think it just means non-separation.
Yeah.
That's all it means. It means you're not believing in separation.
And that has been a big theme between you and I think a big common ground is this, the idea that what's wrong in our society, in our world today, is that the root of it, to some degree, is that we believe we're separate from one another and not realizing that actually we are interconnected, and that black doesn't exist without white. The valleys don't exist without the mountains, and vice versa. You can't know light without darkness, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's such a crucial realization. And, in Buddhism, you see this as the insight of interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, which is wonderful. Everyone should go check out Thich Nhat Hanh. I think he's very wholesome and great. But he talks about interbeing, but this is a Buddhist sort of doctrine, right? The doctrine of no self, which is an interesting way of
saying no separation.
Yeah, it's not that they're saying there is necessarily no self. They're just saying no separate self.
Right. Right.
But it's unique. It's like they're saying, okay, so I think of myself as Winston. You think of yourself as Morgan. But when we sort of dig,
I do.
Yeah. But when we dig deeper into that, we realize that we're in this constant flux. All these different thoughts. And you're growing, your body's changing, you're aging, that when we really try to pinpoint the self in you, we can't do it. It's not really possible. And so
I think about this a lot right now. And if you need to, just tell me to shut up and finish your thought.
Fine.
Well, I just think about this a lot. It's like all of us have probably had many ideas of who we are through our lives. Some of them are probably, positive self-images. Some of them are probably negative self-images. So I feel like all of us have had an array of images we have thought was us, that we thought defined us, or truly described us. And then we've also all been told things by multiple different people. Some people may see you in kind of a shining light. Some people may see you in a darker light, a darker way. So, for me, lately I've been going through a bit of an internal crisis, and, the mind looks back on these, what do other people say about you? What do other people say? And it looks at all these various opinions and ideas, and then it looks on my own opinions of myself, my own ideas. And the gist of it is there isn't one solid thing there. There's many different conclusions, many different ideas, and change does seem to be kind of the defining factor, like a constant state of change and flux.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why, Buddhism and all that stuff continues to fascinate me, because it's saying that this moment is always new, and we sort of keep our personalities and all those things going by habit, that they're habitual thought patterns, whether, like you're saying, you're thinking, you're always checking in. What are other people thinking? What do my parents think about this? What are my friends? What are my family, my wife, my children? What do they all think about this? And all those things are influencing it. And so the spiritual idea, right, is like calling you back to this notion of no self, that you're actually part of a larger whole, and it all goes together. And again, you can find a parallel for that in Christianity with the no self, because St. Paul writes, there is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So it's that, there's no longer slave nor free, male nor female, Jew nor Greek. It's kind of throwing off all of those separate identities.
Right.
The identities that society gives us, and saying the only true identity is Christ, the Christ nature, or, right, alternatively, the Buddha nature, or whatever you want to call it. There's something that is deeper than our sort of surface level identities that we have, that society is telling us who we are all the time. Whether you're black or white or gay or straight or whatever,
Let me ask you one quick question. Have you felt in your life at times, I'm not saying a constant realization of it or anything, but have you felt the unquestionable presence of love?
Well, yeah. I mean, who hasn't, right?
I would think so. I would think everyone has. And it could be called the spirit. I think it could be said that way, I feel like it is available to all of us. And, as I said, I feel like we live in a time when fear is very popular. Fear sells. Fear is shouted at us from the rooftops. Fear, all the time. So love kind of gets lost in that. And people forget about love. And then they're always just in this mode of fear, kind of freaking out. But I feel blessed to have felt that expansive, open sense of oneness. And I like to point out that it's feeling based and not thought based. It's not the thought, this is expansive, open oneness. This is, love. I don't even think those words were there at the moment, but I feel like spirit is available to us. And going back to what you were saying, was it St. Paul?
Yeah.
That the spirit of Christ is within me. I feel like that it could be expressed that way as well.
Right.
The spirit of the Christ consciousness, spirit of love. That's my favorite Christian quote. God is love.
Right.
If you do not know love, you do not know God.
Right. Yeah. And it's tragic in a way that it's kind of obvious when you start thinking about it that we are all seeking love and acceptance in one form or another. Even the fear
exactly right.
is trying to protect ourselves against sort of an opposite experience, wanting...
Exactly.
Nobody wants to suffer. Everyone wants to be free of suffering. And
Right. Yes, absolutely agreed. Yeah. I think that's natural. That's bred into us. Think of any animal. No animal wants to be maimed and suffer and die a horrible death. That's bred into our bodies, that desire to be happy. And as you said, I think love really is what people are seeking, even when they go down these reality tunnels of hatred and, judgment of the other and, creating an other, that which is not me, that which is not love. Although in their minds.
Perhaps one of the interesting questions might be, do we, though, delay the experience of love and acceptance and all that stuff? That's actually one of the things that Alan Watts used to say. He would say, I think in one of his lectures, he said, the reason you're listening to this lecture is, either you're on the way to enlightenment or you're just sort of teasing yourself. Because from that perspective, this is all a game. And that reality is playing with itself. And And like we said, if the universe can be understood as being in a state of bliss, the glory that existence is, there's no point in sustaining that bliss. That because the only way we know anything is through contrast, light and darkness, up and down. So it's all through contrast. So we have to ask ourselves, is some of this in some sense deliberate? Just playing sort of devil's advocate, right?
Sure.
That, You know?
Well, Watts expressed it many times, but he believed that we were God, or whatever other term you want to use for it, consciousness, universal consciousness, I don't know, whatever term you want to use.
An aperture through which the entire universe is looking at and exploring itself.
Sure. But he thought we were God, the absolute that had taken on these conditions and limitations to experience something other than being just the absolute, which is an interesting idea. That could be true. I couldn't say yay or nay to it,
Well, it's different than we commonly think because, see, a lot of people, I think, and within the Christian tradition, you see this expressed, God being expressed in a politically kingly sense of God being in the royal throne, which is ironic, right? That this, you have a lot of people who declare themselves to be atheists or whatever, don't believe in God because, well, I just don't believe in God as being a white man with a white beard sitting in the clouds in a throne in the sky. But it's ironic because
his beard is actually orange. Yeah. And it's beautiful.
Oh God. Well, we're talking about Santa, I think, to some degree, but it's ironic because actually the Christian image of God, like we said, is love, is Jesus. It's the guy who's washing people's feet, who's welcoming the outsider, the outliers, the outcasts. Right. So and that's the image. That's the Christian image of God.
What is that beautiful passage where he speaks as the outsider? He said, "I was, a stranger in your land, and you took me in."
Right. I was a prisoner, and you didn't visit me. I was hungry. You didn't feed me.
No. I think it does say you did take me in.
Well, it has both. The people on the left did it right. The people on the right didn't, or vice versa. Yeah.
Because I don't know. I like that. It's so beautifully expressed, and I think it puts in a real stark highlight of the current state of affairs in the United States, for example, the demonification of the foreigner, of the outsider, those who are different, the outcast. And it really illustrates how anti-Christian this very hate-oriented movement actually is.
Right. I think that there's this hidden, or not hidden, but like forgotten. It's a Christian message that has been forgotten, that God, the nature of God, this is what the Christian tradition says, I think, in essence, is that the nature of God is kenosis. So that's a word that basically means self-emptying or giving oneself away, that God is continually giving oneself away and trying to get rid of, not hanging on, not clinging to oneself, that the nature of God is self-abandonment, which fits in with, again, the Buddhist doctrine of no self, right? But we see that. We see that on Jesus just basically always humbling himself, the idea of being a servant leader, washing the disciples' feet, being crucified, even at the Last Supper, where Jesus is saying, "This is my body, take and eat it. This is the wine is his blood. Take and drink it." All of this is a self-emptying. It's a self-sacrifice, not self-sacrifice. This is the tragic thing, right? That the popular notion of Christianity is what's called substitutionary atonement theory, which is the fact that Jesus was a blood sacrifice, right, for a bloodthirsty God.
Right. He was the lamb. Yeah. He was the lamb.
And he had to be sacrificed.
Going back to, kind of Old Testament style of doing things, right?
Right. Okay, Jesus is the necessary sacrifice, and now we can be on good terms with this bloodthirsty God. who's going to
Exactly.
accept us,
Exactly.
instead of realizing that the whole narrative and what the whole thing is trying to communicate is that actually God is always giving God's self away. See, that's very different. That's a different idea, that God is trying to reach us, and that God is always giving God's self away and not clinging to oneself, saying, take and eat, this is my body, this is my blood, trying to reach us through that. And it's definitely a different idea,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I mean, my only knowledge of this Jesus character, historical character or biblical character, as portrayed in the Bible, is, the words attributed to him. And, do I actually know if that person existed? I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, as you've told me, there's no records of a Jesus Christ or a Jesus of Nazareth or anything, right? In the Roman records.
Well, I know you've been exposed to some of that. I mean, I think there's been some debate, but honestly, I do think that most scholars agree that there was a historical Jesus figure of some sort. I mean, how much we can actually know about that historical figure, I think is debatable. I don't think that it's we can say with anywhere near 100% certainty that everything that's written in the Gospels is the actual words of Jesus.
I feel like personally, from my understanding and reading of that material, I feel like there's a certain portion of it that's very consistent, coherent.
Right.
Do not judge others. Let he who's without flaw, throw the first stone. And God is love. And, so I see that there is a very coherent message there. There also are conflicting messages. I come not to bring peace, but the sword. There's a lot of different messages like that are also included in it. So I feel like, of course, we're dealing with a very old document here, that has been altered many times, very openly by many kings and monarchs and leaders, for various reasons. But anyway, to me, if I get down to what I feel is the essential core of those teachings, and once again, it's coming back to the same simple message, but it's love, non-judgment, and generosity, kindness. These are the core things that I see in that. And once again, I still feel like those are very good values for us to aspire to, at least now. In the time we live in. I feel like they're just as valid and just as useful, maybe even more so. But, as you and I have talked about, at the time when his teachings were coming out, or, at the time that stuff was presented to, the Jewish people, they were having gladiator fights, right? Isn't that the same time period? They were making men fight each other to death for the entertainment of the ultra wealthy. And you're living in this brutal time. I mean, just horrific. The horrible things they were doing, the Romans, right? The Roman soldiers. And then here's a guy saying, no, let's don't kill and hurt each other. Let's help each other out. Love your neighbor as yourself. Hell, let me take it another step further. Love your enemy. Even love your enemy, as yourself. Treat your neighbor as you would be treated. So it's kind of like in that tradition, or in the time period that he appeared in, there was this voice way out in left field. Like, who the hell is this guy? We got men murdering each other for the entertainment of people. And, total exploitation, slavery on so many fronts. And then here's this guy who's basically telling everybody to love each other, that riches are basically meaningless, worldly riches. and all these kind of messages.
Right. Yeah, it's extraordinary. And I mean, I'm not a historian, so I can't necessarily say, when all those things coincided. But yeah, I don't know.
I spoke to a person earlier today, and as you know, not long ago, I went through this. It felt for me like a realization, like trauma, collective trauma, is at the heart of civilizations. What we've called civilization so far has been this kind of movement of collective trauma. And, I feel like that's why Jesus's voice was such a stark contrast to those times and that place he was born in, So anyway, I feel like we live in a culture of trauma here in the United States. The amount of money that is spent on the quote defense budget, which ends up in the death of, thousands of people, at least around the globe annually. And, our focus on money instead of community, and our focus on fear instead of love. I feel like these cultures of trauma keep popping up. And anyway, it is possible, I think, and available to each of us as human beings to, instead of resonating with and acting from fear and acting from hatred and all these other destructive emotions, I think it's possible for us to act from love, to at least try to aspire to that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I have gone through periods of my life where I've sort of have felt, well, maybe Christianity is not relevant anymore. What Jesus was saying is not relevant anymore. We're talking about something that's 2,000 years old and older than that when you're talking about the Old Testament, etc. But like you're already pointing out, and this, I mean, we could spend there's been books written about this, but the whole idea that actually, right, I mean, in the popular understanding of Christianity, a lot of it is outdated. And I think a lot of people walk away from Christianity because they're like, it's not relevant anymore. With our new scientific understandings of the world and the universe, this stuff isn't relevant anymore. We don't believe this stuff literally like that. And I myself have been tempted and said, that's true. It's just, what is this all about? And, you can't take this literally, and it's not relevant anymore. But when you start actually peeling back the layers and digging into it, you start to notice that there actually is something incredibly timeless and universal about, this is why we're talking about this right now.
The perennial philosophy. Well, care for each other, take care of each other, basically.
Yeah, I guess you could put it that way.
Community. An emphasis of community is another way to put it. An emphasis on community.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. And I think in addition to that, though, I think part of what I was trying to get at is the fact that Jesus had a lot to say, I think, about sort of this anti-imperial, the powers that be, what we're seeing currently in our world. It's very surreal in a way when we see, these power structures and capitalism and different things that
mega churches.
Yeah, it's like certain things that are not necessarily serving our society and for the greater good and for the good of all and the common people. And what you find is Jesus critiquing a lot of that, of critiquing the establishment and saying there's a better way, there's a different way, and we don't have it yet. And that, I think that is the reality, that we haven't actually taken seriously and implemented the things that Jesus was advocating. A society, an alternative society that really serves people.
There have been people who have tried. There definitely have been people who have tried. And
Hmm.
I would say anyone who tries to form an intentional community, they're trying in some way to, form community. And, in the United States, our idea of community is based on money.
Hmm.
If you have enough money, you can pay to get whatever services you need from people. And that's really basically all the community you need. That's kind of the general sense of what it is now.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of people who are trying to form community and connections. And, being a person who has tried that and is trying that, it can be challenging at times. And we're all sort of in this nuclear family mode now. You're either in sort of an isolated loner or a nuclear family mode for the most part.
Hmm.
And there's just a great sense of isolation, I think, now among people.
Right.
So these messages of love and like, wait, we're not really that different. We all do have the same desire for love. We have the same desire to be treated well. And that's where those teachings of love your neighbor as yourself, treat your neighbor as you would be treated come from.
Right.
So I agree with you. Those teachings still have great value.
Right. Yeah, there's so many different dimensions and elements to them. I mean, that's why we're still talking about them, right? I mean, there's sort of like the speaking to the power structures, the structures that are still oppressing people even today. Even though a lot of us would deny that or try to turn a blind eye to that, we're not living in a fair society in a lot of ways. We're working towards it, but we still have a ways to go. I mean, when you got the ultra rich.
And I feel like the real dysfunction is within. In the movie Mary Magdalene, he's saying, what about your anger? What about, he's pointing people back to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the key thing. The challenge that we need to overcome is within. It's not really an external person. It's not really an external political party. It's not really any of these things. We need to look at our own pain realistically and our own things that keep us from being loving. Those are the things we need to address. And that was touched on, I believe, as well with Jesus's teachings. The revolution is really inward.
Yeah, right.
The revolution is inward.
Right. And it's funny you mention that, because what's so central, once again, to Christianity is smashing the scapegoat mechanism, which is the idea of, which is a big part of, right, the whole Jewish and Christian history. But I think that at its heart, it's saying we have to stop this scapegoating. In other words, we place the blame on the other. We're saying it's them, it's the outsider. And because Jesus, what did he do? He was saying, no, we're not going to demonize the people who disagree with us, the tax collectors, the drunkards, he was critical of the Pharisees and all that stuff, you could say. But really, he was about, like we talked about, having compassion and not demonizing the other.
Right.
And
what
you're talking,
unfortunately, we see so strongly in American politics, and even with presidents who claim to have a special connection to Jesus or claim to be a representative of Jesus at this time. Mm-hmm. But what we find in their rhetoric is very divisive, judgmental, and I would say it may be, a blunt way to put it, but anti-Christian.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, I do think we got to turn it back on ourselves and realize, man, there's some great meme or something I saw by some guru, and a student asked them, how do I love the other, or something like that. And the guru just replies, there is no other.
Yeah.
And that's really the idea, I think, in some sense, that we have to turn it back on ourselves. And once we do, we realize, hey, it's all interconnected. And even though there are
Yeah.
differences and conflicts and contradictions and paradoxes, that we're all bound up together, you know?
Right. And once again, going back to science's understanding of matter, it's really all just empty space anyway,
Hmm.
in motion. And, you know, there really isn't separation. As you know, I'm very interested in the environment. If any of us was cut off from the air provided by the trees around us and the plants of this planet and the plankton, we would die within minutes.
Yeah.
So life is connection.
And even when we find contradiction and, bumping up against one another in different ways, in a strange way, I do think that there are times when that really can contribute to, and it's a necessary part of how things are. For example, Jessica, she's doing, my wife, homeschooling, and she's doing this astronomy class, and she was talking about the nature of stars and how a star is actually a fight, basically, this conflict between gravity and the constantly exploding nitrogen or whatever it is that's
Hydrogen.
yeah, hydrogen. It's just exploding, and then the
Yeah.
gravity, because everything has gravity, I guess, is sucking it back in. And so what a star is that contradiction. It is that fight between, and I guess the gravity will always eventually win or whatever. But
Well, the gravity sort of wins because it implodes on itself, right? And then there's the supernova, which scatters the material endlessly, scatters it back. Or I guess the gravity can truly win and it becomes a black hole.
hmm.
If the gravity truly wins on a big enough star, I think is the gist of it.
Yeah. But once again, you could say that, okay, those things are in conflict, but again, a star could not exist without that conflict. And so they imply one another. They're part of the same interconnected
Sure.
system. And so I feel like it just points back to the oneness thing that,
Right.
in a way,
You could say that a gazelle and a lion are in conflict. The lion wants to eat the gazelle wants to survive.
Hmm.
But the fact is, the lion depends on the gazelle. And the gazelle it becomes stronger by the lion's involvement. As a species, they become stronger.
Right.
So, right, you can see it as conflict, but in another way, it's interaction, it's relation.
Right.
It is, once again, it's connection on many different levels.
Yeah.
So,
It's this strange and incredible dance,
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And, I feel like at this point, I feel like it's ultimately mysterious what is happening, what this whole thing is, what started it. Science tries to come up with explanations, and they've invented dark matter to explain why the universe is accelerating as it expands. Because I think they tried to used to look at it as an explosion, and an explosion eventually runs out of energy.
Hmm.
So they're stumped. Why is the universe accelerating as it expands? So we have all these ideas and explanations about things. But I think when we really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, or really get down to the essence, we don't know what the fuck's going on. I think that's the core of it.
That's really
and
the bottom line, isn't it?
And that's my happy place. Like, there's moments where I'm like, wait, I can figure this out. I can, and I think knowledge has its place, in all the disciplines, in building houses like I do out of earth. Knowledge has an important place, but I think, some of these ultimate answers, I feel like trying to come up with a final answer would almost be an insult. I feel like the best way to approach them is openness,
Right.
And not having a conclusion about it.
Right. Yeah. That's part of the Zen, like we talked about, and even in Christianity. this whole idea. I think one of the central things actually about Christianity, even though it doesn't have a reputation for it, is that it's not about understanding God conceptually or with doctrines and ideas and beliefs, but rather through a relationship, through experience of right, because what is existence? It is relationship. I mean, that's a whole going into Watts thing, but that where do we find God? We find God in love. We find God in relationship with one another. When you are caring for people, when you're having compassion for people, we're not talking about beliefs and doctrines now. We're saying that was the message. That was the message.
This isn't saying you isolate someone else because they believe differently. Mm-hmm. You cast them out. It is not saying that. It's saying you recognize the universal in all.
And you will actually experience the presence of God when you and a few others are gathered and are loving each other. Just loving each other.
I feel like, and I may be wrong, but I feel like, as you said before, most of us have experienced that spirit of connection, connectedness. And it's really only the limitations in our mind that make us lose it. It's only the belief in separation in our mind. And, once again, as I said, I've had this kind of realization that there's this trauma running through our culture and really most cultures that have come before us. Mm-hmm. So, once again, giving respect to that mystery, what is, exactly happening here. But yeah, I feel like that love is available to us. I feel that the spirit of love has manifested in my life many times, many places. You could say all friendships and everything is a manifestation of that. So, right. I think it's important, that we keep to the basics and what's important. And I do feel love is it, you know.
Cool. Well, I think this has been, another typical Tuesday night or whatever for us. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe we'll sign off and say to be continued and another typical night for me and you.
That's it, man. Yeah, bullshitters forever.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Till next time, folks.